back to the past centuries when there wasn't any influence of Western lifestyle upon the people. So this is a story, and if I can share my slide with you, let me see the possibility of it. Uh, yes. Okay, it seems a bit difficult for me. So let me read from my slide. The role of languages in shaping mindsets in Pakistani context. In Pakistan, there are mainly two languages of newspapers, Urdu and English language newspapers, and they have their own specific readerships reflecting their mindsets, their own beliefs, particular beliefs, and the editors of Urdu language newspapers take care of their beliefs and include in their editorial policies the material that panders to their readers' taste. Whereas English language newspapers are more rational in their editorials, and they pander to the taste of English language readers who are more attuned to the wider perspectives, the more objective perspectives, and the less dogmatic approaches. Writings in English language are thought to be meant for the readers familiar to the modern streams of knowledge, and criticized by the Urdu newspapers and as well as the anti-national and so on. Then the translations of Urdu writings bring to the foreground the thinking patterns of regressive forces. The Urdu writings like this one, Dhanak by Ghulam Abbas, when they are translated into the English language newspapers, we are appalled at our society, at the true picture of our society. There has been a continuous criticism of Anglophone Pakistani literature by the most of the readers in the country. The first question they ask, why are we writing in English? Why do we need to write in English when we have our own language? And secondly, they also criticize the projection of or the appreciation that English language fiction writers like Mohsin Hamid, Kamla Shamsi, or Nadeem Aslam get on the international literary festivals, ignoring the fact that the themes and the themes that they induct into their works are of more wider nature as compared to the fictional works written in Urdu. There are some writers who are prolific in both Urdu as well as English writings, and their writings reflect the influence of the contemporary approaches towards fiction writing. Then the translations of English writings reveal to the masses the rational critique of their society. Our society is not very conducive to criticism of the ugly faces. It's ugly faces like honor killing, like gender discrimination, or the religious frenzy prevalent in the society. The Blasphemy novel by Temina Durrani, its criticism by the local media reflects this mindset very well. It is the main reason that the novels like A Case of Exploding Mangoes, Muhammad Hanif, when they are translated into Urdu language, they are banned by the authorities. The framework that I selected to analyze the story was by Josh Steiners, and it was given in his book After Babel, published in 1998. He defines the hermeneutic approach towards translation as the investigation of what it means to understand a piece of oral or writing speech, and the attempt to diagnose this process in terms of a general model of meaning. So there are two facets of translations. On one hand, the general model of meaning that a translation offers, and on the other hand, the struggle that the translator puts in to understand a piece of or written speech. It consists of four parts. Initiative trust. Initiative trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the, the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of confidence in the translator that the translator will use the language that the translator chooses. Then there is trust. Trust is the investment of
Basundhara, perhaps we have lost the audio, and I also wanted to convey to Adnan, Dr. Adnan, that he should wind up his paper, but the audio is lost, perhaps.
No, yes, you are audible, ma'am, but he is not audible. Yes.
Yes, he is not audible. So
Yes,
can we move
yes.
on to the next person?
Yes. Yes, I believe we can move on to the next person. And our next presenter for today is Dr. Sutapa Chaudhary. Is she present here? She was present here, but then I think she left. Maybe she got a connection error or something.
Yes,
Dr. Sutapa Chaudhary?
hello. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
she's here.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Sutapa, ma'am, you're audible.
Oh, okay. Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, and I would
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
and I would request the other participants to please mute themselves, because we would like to listen to the speaker now, to the paper presenter, Dr. Sutapa.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. My paper today is titled Translating Their Mother, Negotiating the Gendered Politics of Literary Translation. I would like to begin with a quote from the poet Sujata Bhatt, titled Truth is Mute. How many languages must you learn before you can understand your own? And this quote succinctly frames my own contentions about the political and gendered nature of literary translation. Literary translation is arguably the most active form of reading and interpretation, and it is also a highly subjective as well as an intensely political act. As Valerie Hennicuett said in her 1999 perceptive essay, that a perfectly transparent translation is impossible, because each translator will give greater or lesser emphasis, subconsciously or otherwise, to different kinds of values, character traits, and impressions. This view is supported by the critic Marian Ury, who notes a translator is first of all a reader, and every reader seeks out in the text those values most congenial to him or her. In support of my point, I would like to focus on two ideologically different translations of Mahendra Singh Parmar's acclaimed Gujarati short story Polytechnic. This story is one of a kind in Gujarati literature because it talks of the predicament, the real life day-to-day predicament, the lower caste, lower class women of urban Gujarat living in delas. Delas are bastis that are surrounded by high walls, almost like ghettos, okay, separating the community. These are women from the Bharwar community, extremely lower caste people, and lower class, very poor people, economically disempowered people. And women in this community lack the basic sanitary facilities, lack a basic toilet for that matter. Disturbance in the voice? Am I not audible? Hello?
No, it's all right. It's all right, Sutapa, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Someone said that the voice is disturbed. Okay. So,
Yes, it could be a network problem at their end.
Okay. No problem. So, this text, as I was saying, it is very different because the original writer is an urban, highly educated, upper caste, upper class male writer who consciously takes on the voice of many disempowered women of the lower caste and lower class community, Bharwar community. And these women talk of the necessity of a toilet in their lives. Very, very gendered text, if I may put this word. But what I'm going to do is give this text a translation. I have done a translation myself, and another translation has been done by Jayant Medhani ji. Jayant Medhani is a native Gujarati speaker who lives in Gujarat and who is highly educated. He is a poet and publisher himself, and he comes from a very literary and educated family. So he gives us a translation, and I, as a Bengali speaker, I'm a native Bengali speaker, I give a translation of the same text. I'm an outsider while he is an insider, but strangely, his translation would give us a flat, smooth reading text. I wish I could present. May I present? How do I do that? Just one moment.
I think, Dr. Sutapa, you can continue like that, because otherwise it will be quite difficult to cover all the participants.
Okay. No problem at all. I will do that. So, as I said, his translation flattens. Both of the translations are in English, and his translation flattens the gendered nature of the text. While the text uses many bodily associations of women whose bodies are odorous, women whose bodies are odorous with the sweat of their toil, and odorous because they cannot relieve their bodily function. So, while the English translation that Jayant Medhani ji, a male insider translator, is using, it does not talk about the bodily odor. Again, there is one aspect of this text in where the women find the circuit house, and in front of the circuit house, late at night, they sit down to relieve themselves, because there is no toilet in their bela, in their basti. But because it is a circuit house, all the VIPs are coming and going by that road. So what happens is the headlights of the cars, they lash onto the bodies of these women as the lustful tongue of a monster. So these kind of complex gendered notions of the text are completely erased in Jayant Medhani's translation. While my translation, as an outsider, I would, and as a feminist, I have pointed out and given emphasis to those points. I think and that gives a kind of a different reality for the translated text and its readers. So I know. I would,
Dr. Sutapa, yes, please try to wind up.
Yes.
Because already time.
I know. So because it is solicited time, I would wind up right now. So translating the mother, that is the title of my paper. The mother tongue in India, it is so multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual, and all multi-things. It is so diverse. But the mother tongue and the other tongue, they are inextricably entangled. How we translate a text, who is translating, and for whom becomes extremely crucial. So I would again end with the poem that I had, the reference to a poem I had used from Sujata Bhatt. How many languages must we know before we can understand our own? Thank you very much.
That was a wonderful paper, and I would now ask Basundhara to announce the next speaker so that we can move on to the next one.
Yes. Thank you, Sutapa ma'am. Our next presenter is Dr. Shreyashi Datta from Balurghat Mahila Mahavidyalaya, West Bengal, and the topic of her paper is Transcreation Creates Identity, reading the various presentations of Sita. Shreyashi, can we have you?
Yes, yes, yes.
Welcome,
Okay.
welcome.
Am I audible?
Yes, audible.
Yes,
visible.
yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I welcome you all in this. Can we start with paper?
Yes, yes,
Hello. Can I start my paper, please?
yes, yes, you can.
Okay, okay. So the topic has already been introduced by Vasudhara. Yes. So translation is a powerful medium which bridges the gap between local and local, and it also gives a context. It provides a piece of writing, a localized context of a piece of writing to a global platform. In a multilingual country like India, so translation has helped knit together the country as one nation and one solidarity. Now, if I consider translation as a creative or creative practice, then according to Pilar, who talks about that a translator is free to depart from the original piece of work, and he can translate it, and when he translates it, the one thing that is in his mind is he's translating only for his contemporaries. Thereby, by stating this kind of a statement, he clearly writing done for 100 years by translation. In this view, Pilar stands as a trans creator. So transcreation is the tool that assists in bringing out the other possible interpretations present in reading a text through its layers. It's also, by now, we are all acquainted with one book by Translation Studies by Andre Levefier and Susan Besnett. Here also, in the introduction, you can find that translation is defined as a kind of rewriting or manifestations of refraction, which is very oftenly nomenclated as transcreation. This transcreation, when I'm talking about transcreation, I'm talking about new understanding or new beginning or new meaning attached to a text. That doesn't mean it totally moves away from the original writing. Rather, the ideological vision of the transcriber gets injected in work. This ideological position can be employed in order to discuss society as a voice of marginalized of weakness. It can be said or believed. Creations create and create changing the power equation of a work. Now, since we are pressing for time, I'm not here giving so much on emphasis on the feminist critical insights, but I'll quickly try to read the second half of my paper. That's how Sita is presented in various writings. Now let's see the character of Sita, how this iconic figure changes with the change of writers. Sita is somewhere held as a repository of traits worth emulating, while on the other hand, questions are sometimes raised about the efficacy of her role and attitudes. She is sometimes venerated as a noblest form of women and in some fashion considered as oppressed. The belief that Sita herself was not exactly Ravana, it was only her shadow which went with the preponderance of Advaita Vedanta philosophy. We all know we are in Maya. There are also certain influenced by the Ram as a tragedy Ravana. So, Sita has Ravana in the read by King Janaka. Here goes some traditional perception tracted or taken down the road in the cultural path. Talking about perspective.
Shreyasi, can you please wind up? Shreyasi, can you please wind up?
Sure, ma'am, sure. When we talk about give me a minute. So it's like when you talk about vision perspective, Nina Palace. You find Sita singing love song, and she's present in a very attractive way. The dress also speaks a lot about Sita, specifically in that Nina Palace play. Then you have Madhukeshwar's article. One quotation I'll get with is Sita. This Sita, tired of Ravana, but it's I here stands for Sita and you here stands for Ram. I who reject and I reject you above all as one of my unborn children. And I live with glory in my heart, but not you, but Ravana. Okay, where the of her has the character in the unidimensional notion of women's education. Feminist writers of resistance and in empowerment the marginalized. Thank you.
Huma ma'am, you are muted. Huma ma'am, you are muted.
Okay, so that was also a very interesting paper, talking about transcreation and how Sita, the mythical figure of Sita, has been transcreated in different works. So I would now request Dr. Basundhara to introduce the next presenter.
Yes. Is Dr. Upendra Kumar Dwivedi here? Is Dr. Upendra here? If not, we move over to the next presenter. We move over to the next presenter. That is Dr. Upendra Kumar, are you here? We move over to the next presenter, Dr. M.S. Gayatri Devi. The topic of a paper is translation of politics. Dr. Gayatri Devi?
Yes, can you hear?
Yes.
Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So good evening to all the participants as well as the chair. So my paper is titled The Translation as Politics, and it is seen, or it is written in the context of Orientalist translations of Eastern works. So on the periphery, what we see is that translation is seen as the rendering of a text from source language into a target language, ensuring that the maximum of the two, or the literal meaning of the two, will be approximately similar. But this is not always right, because translation involves the transference of cultural elements from the source culture to the target culture. As culture, or rather culture difference, is more representative of identity, translation involves cultural identification, and this means that there is a mediation, and this mediation involves the concept called the cultural politics. So when you talk about cultural politics, it is linked to the another concept called as cultural construct. So what I mean to say is that here, whatever text, literary text is taken, it is seen as a cultural construct. In cultural studies paradigm, the writer is linked to the reader through the culture, which is a paradigm of identity. It is more applauded than the earlier view of literary studies paradigm, in which there is a difference in experience when the same text is analyzed in different cultural environments. As the literary studies paradigm connects the writer to the reader through the universal medium of language, no such difference is experienced in experience is created. Translation is a form of cultural studies, where culture is a paradigm of identity. Talking about politics, as we all know, it constitutes the organizational structure of a society, and it involves the attitude of the rulers and the worldview of the subjects. Every politics has got a set of strategies to perpetuate and strengthen itself. And colonialism, as an outcome of imperialism, is a system of political domination in which an imperial power implants colonies in distant continents. The distant colonies are ruled by representatives who symbolize the tyranny of power, and colonialism developed several strategies to consolidate its position and to rule the colonies. And in such case, translation was seen as one such strategy to perpetuate the colonial power. Politics, we all know, politics need not be always explicit. There are oblique forms of politics which are rarely recognized by the subjects. So the rulers find them convenient to appropriate it as a discourse. They can be easily adapted into a medium to serve a message. The subjects are unaware of the fact that they are the consumers of a politics enforced by the rulers. So the colonizers mainly used a politics that doesn't look like politics, according to James Scott, to quote James Scott. Translation is one such form of politics. During colonization, translation was appropriated as a medium to propagate the cultural ideology conceptually embedded in Orientalism. a set of discourses that construct the Orient as the cultural other of the Europe. Orientalism was protected as a service rendered to the colonized countries by the writers of the empire as part of its civilizing mission. Edward Said has deconstructed the popular notion of Orientalism. In this post-colonial context, translation is an ideologically conditioned discursive practice. It is at once a colonialist discourse practiced by the colonizer and at the same time a resistance discourse developed by the colonized. Translation is never a politically neutral linguistic act. It is a deeply political medium. Orientalist translation is a part of the colonial tactics of understanding the Orient with a view to domesticate them. It definitely involves the appropriation of Eastern culture, which is seen as a political strategy which was used by the European colonialism. As culture is representative of identity, as I said earlier, translation involves cultural identification, and the mediation in translation consists of culture politics. The discourses of Orientalism circulated the appropriated narratives which constructed the Orient as the cultural other against the positive identity of the European colonizers disguised as the self-appointed agents of the civilizing mission. If you look into many of the works that were translated by the Orientalists, like Shakuntala, Bhagavad Gita, Manusmriti, Rubaiyat, any text you take, you can see this political appropriation of those translations. And these translations constructs a semiological hierarchy between the two cultures, which ensure a space for Western hegemony. They actually try to attempt to contain the artistic achievements of the writers of the East and to assert the supremacy of the dominant European culture. In short, the Orientalist translations of Eastern classics therefore show the cultural politics practiced by the colonizers based on the concept called as cultural otherings. The translations form part of an ethnographic project to show the West the isolated barbaric literary islands and to justify the civilizing mission that they have done to the East. In this context, translation becomes a hegemonic strategy that legitimizes colonization as part of white man's burden to civilize the Orient. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Dr. Gayatri had stuck to the time limit and she stopped on her own. That was wonderful. And this was also very interesting take on translation. And she spoke about the whole the concept, the theory of Orientalism that she has brought into her paper, and how a translation is a political act. And but I would also say, as Dr. Sutapa Chaudhary also noted down, that how it is important that who is translating and for whom. So this Orientalism or this theory will be only feasible only when we are talking about Europe versus the indigenous cultures and how literature is being translated from there or from here. But if it is happening within the culture, or for example from one regional language, from Bengali to English, or from any other language of Indian language to English, so that is somewhat different stakes that are there in that particular thing. But it was definitely an interesting one, and particularly I am also very much interested into Orientalism and that's why this paper interested me a lot. Okay, so maybe we can move on.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Okay,
thanks. Thank you.
Yes, our next presenter is Professor Shaila Prasad, who will be talking about the transposed heads to Hayavadana. So you'll be talking about this in this paper. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, myself, I'm Shaila Prasad, Madanala Shaila Prasad from Badruga College of Commerce and Arts, Hyderabad. And as my topic is translation of works, the transposed heads to Hayavadana, right? These two writings which I compared, both are appears to be similar, but they are different, and they are varies from the point of view of their individual perspectives. That is what in translation literature work encourages exploring new perspectives. Here also, when we look at these two writings, these two writings appears to be translated. At the same time, they appears to be adaptations. And in terms of interpretation of lives, so they were interpreting the different kinds of lives, how they are actually. The four characters, two characters in first work as well as the retold story. When we talk about translation, some literary works goes on translated with too many changes or a slighter changes or little bit adaptations. Either the story is retold. So translation need to be taken care. As we said by the Dryden, he quote, when words appear literally gracefully, it were an injury to the author that they should be changed. But since when it is beautiful in one language is often barbarous many, sometimes nonsense in other, it would be unreasonable to limit translator to narrow compass of his author's words, ties enough if chooses to some expressions which does not vitally the sense. So in the similar context, what Dryden has said here, whenever the author should take some liberty and he should apply his own methods as we called it as adaptations in other simple words. So here translation, when we look at the transposed head, originally written in German by German with titled of Devastua Copigo, is a novel by Thomas Mann, and it was written in 1940s. And the same thing is retold, or you can say it is translated or else retold or adaptation. What we could see is that it has turned into Hayavadana under the writings of Girish Karnad. And what he actually has done, if we look at the Girish Karnad, what he has done is that he has done the work as a translation as well as adaptation, and he added Indian flavor to it. Though the transposed head also covers with the Indian mythological story, here he has introduced with praying to the god, and the Bhagavata comes in and he retells the story, and he a little bit modified. And as we look at the Dryden said that if at all you want change the work as well words, then what will happen? It will lose us and it will lose the flavor of that language. So similarly here, when we look at even Hayavadana he started with folklore as well as he used the terms with Indian storytelling method, where he even extended the story, he prolonged the story. And when we talk about this Girish Karnad, he translated this one, and regarding the translation, Agnesi Katsinko, he says that translation is in fact an art both estimable as well as very difficult, and therefore it is not a labor or portion of common minds. So it is not an easy task to translate, and what it requires, he quotes, it should be practiced by those who are themselves capable of being an actors. When they see the greater use in the translating the works of the other than their own works, and hold higher than their own glory the service that they render to the country. Here, when we look at these words, the person who translates, he should have some sort of gist as well as some sort of passion towards the same kind of passion, everything we can sense with the Girish Karnad's writing of Hayavadana, where he has been an actor as well as writer, and he lived with the art form. That is how he has done justification with this transposed head, which is originally written in German and translated by him as two-act play. And here, if you look at the story, what he has done, he has changed the names of the characters and added with the floor art. That is he added the Bhagavata as an additional character. Yeah.
Dr. Prasad, I would request that we should wind up your paper. Come to the concluding remarks.
Yeah. What actually the transposed head to the Hayavadana, he had added he brought beauty to the writings of the transposed head by changing it into the Hayavadana. So it is an appreciation work from the Girish Karnad. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Dr. Afrinul Khan, and the topic of her paper is Translation and the Politics of Power, Rethinking Text and Translation. Afrin, ma'am.
Yes. Am I audible, Basudha? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. You are.
Good evening,
yes,
Honorable Chair. Okay, good evening, Honorable Chair, Honorable Host, and my dear participants. The topic of my paper is Translation and the Politics of Power, Rethinking Text in Translation. My contention is that translation empowers not only the translated text, but also the culture and customs embedded in those texts. I begin my presentation with a quote by Mufti. He says, humanistic culture is saturated with informal developmentalism, first in the West and then elsewhere, structure of global time, in which cultural objects from non-Western societies can be grasped only with reference to the categories of European cultural history as pale or partial deflections. Translation challenges this informal developmentalism of humanistic culture. Translators, especially from the third world nations, rewrite the indigenous texts in English, the hegemonic international language, and make those texts accessible to the English-speaking world, and hence transfer across borders and boundaries the translated text from non-Western nations, and also the rich history, customs, beliefs, and values contained in those texts. In other words, translation enables the relocation not only of the text from third world nations written in indigenous languages, but also the third world cultures which have been, to quote Gayatri Spivak, exploited but with rich intact heritage waiting to be recovered, interpreted, and curricularized in English translation. I propose to examine through an analysis of Gayatri Spivak's translation of Mahashweta Devi's Choti Munda and His Arrow and Lakshmi Comstorm's translation of Bama's Karuku, how the indigenous text as a discourse of cultural specificity and difference is packaged for transnational consumption through translation. I also propose to explore translation as an amalgam of dynamic shifts and movements that aim at diminishing the borders and boundaries and empowering not only the indigenous texts from third world nations, but also the culture embedded in those texts. In his introduction to Translation History, Culture, a source book, Lefebvre refers to Petrus's definition of translation as a text written in a well-known language which refers to and represents a text in a language which is not as well-known. This, according to Lefebvre, is the most productive definition of translation. He goes on to say, it may be a sobering thought that some of the masterpieces of world literature, such as Cervantes' Don Quixote, profess to be translations of lost originals, that they refer to non-existent texts in order to derive some kind of legitimacy which it is felt would otherwise not be present to the same extent. Translation has to do with authority and legitimacy and ultimately with power. Lefebvre's assertion regarding authority and power being invoked by translation cannot be overlooked, as it explains the recent surge in the number of translations from third world nations, especially India, where according to Ashcroft et al., the bulk of literature is written in indigenous Indian languages. The English translation of Mahashweta Devi's Choti Munda and His Arrow and Bama's Karuku has allowed the Western readers access to the works originally written in Indian languages and thus attributed them a new value and global presence. What appears to hinder the growth and distribution of literature from third world nations is the dominance of Western culture. As Sheila Crotcher says, cultural flows are profoundly imbalanced, and what is sometimes described as global culture is really Western culture. Furthermore, the far-reaching distribution and dominance of commodified Western culture is said to work to the advantage of the United States and other Western nations while threatening more vulnerable cultures. This cultural imperialism is sustained by the use of language, and the language in this case is English, which figures prominently in the pattern of cultural dominance. The English translation of Mahashweta Devi's Choti Munda and His Arrow and Bama's Karuku has allowed the Western readers access to the work originally written in Indian languages and thus attributed them a new value and global presence. The rebirth of both the above mentioned texts as English translations has paved the way for their
Dr. Hafteen, I would request you to come to your concluding remarks or just talk about the main points because we are really pressed for time.
Okay.
So already.
So according to me, the ultimate aim of translation is the acquisition of power, which according to Venuti is contingent on the current target language situation. And I'll venture to add here that there is a need of aggressive marketing of the translated text for its success in the marketplace. And it is important to note what Gayatri Spivak has to say. She says that there is a feeling that perhaps this is a denial of voice to the subaltern so that she can only be spoken for. Sujit Mukherjee, a prominent intellectual of the publishing world, particularly concerned with the quality of translations, has called me a Dwar Palika of female doorkeeper of Mahashweta in the West. There is some truth in this. So in my opinion, every translated text needs a Dwar Palak or a Dwar Palika for its marketing in the West, apart from the way it is being marketed, apart from the way it is being translated in order to acquire power. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Afri ma'am. Our next presenter is Ria Bas, who is a research scholar, and the topic of her paper is Being BB, Recognizing the Relevance of Sexual Desire in Disabled in Jhumpa Lahiri's The Treatment of BB.
Am I audible and
Ria,
visible?
I invite you to yes, you're audible and visible. Please go ahead.
Okay.
And try to keep the time limit.
Okay. Yes. So basically, my attempt to deal with translation here is a little different from literary translation. In my paper, I'm trying to focus on sexual translation, where I'm talking about Jhumpa Lahiri's story and character and how she is not being treated as a normal, so say normal, able individual because her sexual desires are left untranslated. And that is why she is not understood, just like we do not understand another language because it is left untranslated to us. To begin with, I would like to talk about how disability has to be understood, or along with understanding disability, the need to understand the sexuality of the disabled is very, very important. So from the land of Manthara and Shakuni to having movies like Margarita with a Straw, which was released some years back, becomes very important for us because the association with disability has always been one of passivity, dependency, and deprivation, where mentally disabled, like for example, BB, who is our protagonist, is completely deemed to be unfit for any kind of arousal of sexual desire in another individual. For me, the treatment of BB in this story, or the medicine that she is being provided, is the sexual reciprocation that she is receiving. So because she is receiving the sexual reciprocation and the societal place or societal respect or societal recognition because of the sexual reciprocation, she is treated at the end of the story. Whether she is raped or whether she is enjoying the sexual association that is happening with the man, we don't know. But the fact that it leads to pregnancy treats her at the end of the story. So only when her desires are translated and understood at the end of the story, we receive a treatment for our protagonist, who is BB Haldar. In the popular body beautiful media image that has been presented to us simultaneously makes disabled women feel guilty about non-conforming to their sexuality. So they are not fit to be sexually active or sexually desired by other people in the society. Simultaneously, it also makes them feel non-conformant to the sexual ideas of the temporarily abled society at that particular point of time. For example, in BB, we see how disease or her congenital epilepsy makes her lack any recognition of sexual identity and need of sexual desire in the case of our story. So according to me, the reciprocation of a 29-year-old woman in the Eastern India of our society is what is the theme of the story that is left, undeciphered or untranslated by the author also, maybe to avoid any kind of controversy. We also see that how BB wants a marital life. She is constantly trying to imagine herself as a wife. She wants to go out to the theater. She wants her husband to buy jewelry. So the life that comes along with this sexual reciprocation that is so-called called marriage according to her societal definitions is what BB demands from the society. And even we see the doctor telling the people of her household that BB needs to get married. So probably the doctor is also hinting towards this kind of a sexual activity that is lacking in the life of a 29-year-old woman. Bibi is also observing the common roles that are played by the housewife in her house, and she's internalizing them. So she wants to wear those saris, those jewelry. She wants to say her parents to save up money so that she can get married, and she also wants the opportunity to perform the chores that the other women in the society are in her household are performing. Primarily my paper here, although I'm not dealing a lot into the paper today because we have a time limit, I'm trying to use Bibi as a symbol in the paper to talk about all those women who are living in such families. And this kind of a Bibi character is the dually oppressed, dually subalterned character. When we are talking about Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak's concept of the subaltern, so here not only literary subalternness is occurring, but because she is a woman, she is a disabled, and she is a woman who does not have a sexual identity. She is being marginally oppressed in the family. So for me, Bibi is a symbol of oppression, of both disability, sexism, and patriarchy in a male-dominated patriarchal structure. So when I'm concluding, the conclusion that I try to draw regarding the story and the treatment that I am trying to interpret in the story as far as Bibi's epileptic fits or her epileptic spasms are concerned is the need to reciprocate, the need to decipher the untranslated, undeciphered, and the problem lies in us, the people who are looking or the people who are gazing at Bibi, who do not understand what her sexual desires are. The social disability model talks about the need for having a particular sort of, parameters for the sexuality in the disabled, which is lacking in the society, lacking in the story, and lacking in all of us, which will definitely lead to the treatment. And we all know how Bibi was treated at the end of the story. That's all for myself. I hope I'm in the time limit.
Thank you, Ria. Uma, ma'am, do you have comments?
Yes, that was a wonderful paper. Ria, congratulations for
Thank you, ma'am.
that. And I'm by listening to your paper, I'm also reminded of this Indra Sinha's novel Animals People, where there is this protagonist who is walking on all fours because that tragedy, gas tragedy that happened in Bhopal, and he's a victim of that, and that is why he was an infant when he suffered from that, and since then he has been walking on all fours. And so likewise, as quite like Bibi, his sexual desires are also not understood by the people, and how he is looked like almost like an animal, and that is why the title of the novel Animals People. So that was an interesting take on from the point of view of the disability studies, looking at the translation thing from that perspective. And Vasudha, I just wanted to add that although I don't want to be impolite to anyone, but those who are lying down or are wanting to listen to these presentations in a leisurely manner, they can just put their cameras off, okay? So because it is very disturbing for other readers and people who are wanting to have an academic interaction. So I would request the others who are in the comfort of their homes wanting to lie down and listen to the papers, they can put their cameras off. Yeah, that's good.
Yes, that was a good instruction. It seems very impolite on our part, to mute everybody like that. Yes, thank you, Uma ma'am, for that. We move ahead with our next presentation, and our next presenter is Krishnandu K, who is a research scholar from Coimbatore, and the title of his paper is Analyzing Translation and Cultural Resistance in K.R. Mira's Hanged Woman. Krishnendu, are you here?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are. Please.
Okay. Good evening, all. Actually, my topic I'm going to present is Analyzing Translation and Cultural Resistance in K.R. Mira's Hanged Woman. And first of all, I start with the term translation. I know I don't have to explain the term translation. All of you know this term. Translation is that the communication of the means that of a source language text by the means of an identical target language. Here, in this paper, we can see the translation of history. Translation of history means the history is being translated. The history of being hangman to it is translated to hang woman. And it also includes the cultural resistance where the author finds in the dominant patriarchal system. The very title of the novel, Hang Woman, of the English translation, and Araja of the original Malayalam work echoes itself cultural resistance. On the first level, protagonist of the novel, this is because except for the fictional protagonist, we can see the protagonist of the novel and one of her female ancestors, there has never been the existence of hang woman ever reported in the history of mankind. Thus, the very concept hang woman has been an imagined one. One of on a second level, when we consider the Malayalam title, that is Arachar, which is devoid of Arachar itself. It means somebody hanging profession itself. It is devoid of any gender tone. We can understand that the attribution of a female character to a male ordained profession, which is named by ruling out the possibility of a female candidate for the profession, is itself a challenge to the strategic dominant cultural institution of patriarchy. And the history presented in the hang woman act as a tactic to present the evolution of the world of the other placed, the so-called other placed in the world of the system from the beginning of the mankind. And there happens a reworking and rewriting of history in the novel. The outside is the realm of the so-called other, the voiceless. It has been the voiceless with reference to the norms and principles of the dominant. Through Chetna, that is the character in this novel, the protagonist of the novel, who is the other, the K.R. Meera, the author of the novel, gives voice to the voiceless other and makes use of the strategies of the dominant as the tactics of resistance. And because of this time limits, I'm stopping here. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishnendu.
Thank you, ma'am.
Should we go ahead, Huma ma'am?
Yes, we can move on to the next, I
Yes.
think.
So we move on to our next presenter, who is Dr. Rupa Sarkar from the School of Humanities, Arka Jain University, Jharkhand. And the topic of a paper is The Fault in Our Stars, a study of translation and literature and creative fiction into life. Yes, Dr. Rupa.
Good evening, everyone. I'll straight away jump into my paper, rather not paper, but just a thought over how the translation of a book, which is a piece of literature, gone into this creating of fiction into life. And for this, I was considering to take up the novel, The Fault in Our Stars. Now, as book lovers are often of the agreement that how one can never judge a book by any translation or adaptation, but literature, it does come to life on the silver screen. There has been great work of art, be it drama, novel, or poetry, or a non-fiction work in literature, which has often been translated rather successfully into audiovisual media. Such translations have given a new and easy understanding towards the work before its written work. We have such brilliant written fiction that came into life with its translation into cinema. Our history is full of such hits, be it William Shakespeare or Sharath Chandra Chattopadhyay or Charles Dickens or even Munshi Premchand, or we can talk about O. Henry's short stories. Their certain works are well translated into this world of audiovisual called cinema or series. Rather, this literature turns out into a new leaf and stays longer into the minds of all the audience. Devdas, Omkara, Shatranj Ke Khiladi, Fitur, Lutera. There are many in numbers, which has termed to be the master translation. As we all would agree with Ezra Pound when she says that great literature is nothing but simply language charged with meaning to the utmost possible degree. Literature, when well appreciated, its written form gets the readers into its world of letters. Today, we have a number of such great literary outputs before us to explore. We have many books. The paper here entitled has come to life through its translation. Like if I talk about the book Fault in Our Stars, it comes to life into through this audio video media in the form of cinema. If I talk about Josh Boone, who directed the movie The Fault in Our Stars, and the well appreciation that he got after the movie, or Mukesh Chabra, who directed Dil Bichara, they both have done justice to the author's theory of the love life of the two such couple who were in verge of serving, or they were going through this terrible, unbearable, dreadful disease. The two people, they were young, and they were too young to die as they are enfolded into the traps of cancer. Two people battling death, yet dreaming a new beginning. It's kind of a morbid story ruled by romance and laughter. The novel's popularity became a layered observation on the nature of life. Dil Bechara is directed by Mukesh Chabra, and he has the indulgence of an imposing source material, but it authorizes an old filmmaking truth that a good movie needs much more than a compelling story. The book highlights about the people about cancer and people who are going through, but it is well aware about their slowly approaching death. It gives us, the pain that they go through. The writer, Mr. Green, he has tried to bring out that pain through these characters, and it's quoted from his text. It states that getting hurt in this world is unavoidable, but we do get to choose whom we allow to hurt us, and that he is happy with his choice and hope she likes hers too. The book closes with Hazel stating that she is happy with her choice. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlining. The novel is kind of, drenched into the life of Hazel Grace and Augustus Waters. They find a common smile, even known to the fact that they will never live happily ever after. They both fall for each other, they both fall in love, but forever within the n numbered of days, they kept on changing their attitude. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Rupa, I would request you to conclude. Please wind up.
Okay, ma'am. Now, if I say, talking about the Hindi translation of the novel into Indian cinema, the story brings out the characters lively. It justifies the book also with the story. It is well translated. It brings out that the theme of the book, which is that life and life goes on, and it is like one life builds the other life. That's all, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rupa. We move over to our next presenter, Manoj S. The title is Translation Shift and Barriers in Translating Afghan Literature. Is Manoj here?
Yeah, I'm here. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
So, okay, so just let me go better. The title of my paper is Translation Shift and Barriers in Translating Afghan Literature. The inclusion of foreign words in an English text is not something new. It is a technique adapted by many foreign writers. They used to write or translate their books into English. They probably do this to highlight certain aspects of their culture. Some does that to introduce those ideas to the targeted audience. Some might not get chance to tell what they really need through their own language, such as in Afghan. There is not much freedom for people to write everything and anything that they want to do. So they choose to translate their works in other foreign languages and all. That's how it did. And cultural ideas for audience. They sometimes when they do this kind of translations, these foreign words which are present alongside their English counterparts makes it a little bit difficult for those who are able to translate this English compounds to the same into other languages. This is really a barrier when it comes to translating. And the same barrier can be seen in English works by Khaled Hosseini. Khaled Hosseini is a very famous Afghan-American novelist. And in his works, the translating works phrases. Usually the languages such as Pashto and Dari, they are like very, very old, like 2,500 years old traditional languages. These 2,500 old languages have phrases that are not readily translatable available here. I'm focusing on the translation shift and shortcomings in translating the works from Afghan literature, such as the poems of Jalaluddin Rumi. Rumi is translated in almost every languages that are known. But if you just go online and search translations of Rumi, majority of the search results would say that current translations are terrible. They are disappointing, because that's the truth. There's no clear there are few books that are quite similar to what he tried to say, but there is nothing that is as perfect as his way. The way of producing works of art in the past is not completely the way the works are produced in the contemporary ways. The paper perhaps portrays a glimpse of short contemporary ways, and one face translating the works into another language. And what I try to find here in this paper is that without knowing the centuries worth of tradition, one cannot simply successfully translate the exact meaning into works of modern days. It has to be a lot has to go through finding the perfect translation. When, let's say, when we ask someone what is a perfect translation, one say it would be translating works such as Afghan. Translation can only be called successful only when it succeeds in giving the sense of the original, that the one who is reading the work is unaware that the work is actually translated. Only when the person who is reading a translated work thinks this is not actually translated, this is from this certain language, only then we could say that the translation is successful. But that is not a case when it comes to translating the works of Afghan. Almost every time there are someone commenting that these words doesn't mean what it means in Afghan, these phrases doesn't mean what it means in Parsi, so and so and so. Like in all the 3-4 famous novels by Khaled Hosseini, the Kite Runner, the Mountain Echoed, and the everything, and his last short work, Sea Prayer, we could see such complications in these works also. Those works are sometimes culturally untranslatable because the phrases, metaphors, etc. in those literature cannot be translated into any other language. Even if they do translate, they won't be successful in translating the cultural impact, the cultural sense of what those words originally mean. There is no way of telling that Afghan, and this culture is those translations. Because when we look at the old Afghan literature, it will comprise mostly of Dari and Pashto, and those languages are usually the works of literature produced in those two like century-old languages are usually oral literatures. There are no clear written metaphors, there's no clearly written phrases, and so on. So it is almost impossible to translate. It is possible to translate, but it is impossible to translate the exact thing, the exact phrase, the exact cultural meaning that the works implies. Like, yeah, as like I said earlier, if you search online, you would see that these translations are nothing short of disappointment. The metaphors are almost always impossible to grasp. The product of translation, if you ask me, that it shouldn't be just a new text that is readily accepted in the targeted language. Like if you look at the works of Khaled Hosseini, his modern The Kite Runner has been translated into like 40 plus languages, and it was readily accepted in all those languages. The structure may be the same, the form may be the same, the grammar could also be the same, but the cultural context is never the same when it is translated from the one to another.
Sorry to disturb you, but you have to wind up your paper. Please do it in a minute.
Ma'am, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, that's it. It is not possible to translate it completely into something new. They could translate the context, they could translate the form and structure, but they cannot translate the cultural implications. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. That was a wonderful presentation. And we move ahead to our next presenter, Shaista Rahman, who is an independent researcher, and she'll be talking about reconstructing identity and positioning translation work, a critical analysis of Anita Desai's Translator Translated. Shaista, can we have you? Shaista, are you here? You are here. Are you unable to unmute yourself? Shaista Rahman?
She's
Please
there.
unmute
She is
yourself.
there.
Yes, she is here. Please unmute yourself, Shaista, to be audible to us. Yes, you can't. You click on your picture and you will find that there is a microphone shaped button. In case you are unable to unmute, you can leave. You can leave the meeting and rejoin again. So in that way, you can refresh your connection and see if it works. In the meantime, we will go over to the next presenter and we will come back to Shaista when she's ready. So in the meantime, we'll move over to our next presenter, Sahira Sadaf Khan from the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. And the title of her paper is Revisiting Bhishma Sahani's Tamas, a scrutiny of idioms, phrases, and proverbs in the light of its English translation by Jay Ratan. So can we
Hello, yes, good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, my name is Shahira Safdar Khan, and my topic is Revisiting Bhisham Sahni's Tamas, a scrutiny of idioms, phrases, and proverbs in the light of its English translation by Jay Ratan. So, the translation studies since the time languages have existed is a well-researched and dealt matter across the world and in the Indian scenario as well. From antiquity till date, authors are getting their text translated or are themselves trying their hands on translation. Translation is generally viewed under linguistic and cultural dynamics other than the social linguistic aspects and translators' decisiveness over other matter like accentuating themselves or compressing the text or sometimes leaving the text untranslated altogether. So this paper studies in deep the cultural nuances, particularly the idioms, phrases, and proverbs of a translated novel, which raised a rage for being a politically, culturally, and socially upfront novel. Bhisham Sahni has successfully portrayed the intense atmosphere at the time of partition of India, where three major religious communities are at the loggerheads with each other due to their ignorance and influence of extremist groups and political parties. The novel Tamas has so many cultural layers to it that any reader would be submerged with the rich insights of Indian culture, the traditions, colloquialism, the slang, slogans, and idiomatic expressions, and much more. So, the rich Hindi novel had been and still is an epitome of a great depiction of historical event of India's partition after the British rule. How far Jeratan's English translation of the same has been successful in arousing the same emotions, especially in the light of its cultural depiction in the form of idioms, phrases, and proverbs, is the main concern of my paper. So a text when taken cannot be analyzed in isolation. In translation, there always is a transfer of culture as much as of language. Any literary text is incomplete without the culture. If language is the body of the text, then the culture is its soul. For any translator, it is a specialized task of competence to carefully analyze the source culture which he can further carry in this target text. He must carry the responsibility of a cultural insider for both ST and TT. So the culture carries the essence of language. A major part of language comprises of the cultural terms, traditions, type of humor, slangs, and informal expressions used, the idioms, proverbs, environment, weather, and locations, and much more. Thus, for a successful translator, the main aim is not only to transfer the language, but also to transfer the culture, that is, its people. Many layers are attached to the text at the cultural level. So the translation of idioms, proverbs, and phrases have always been a critical matter for translators as well as for translation evaluators, not only in the sense of translation, but to define in the idioms and proverbs in a few words, unlike the idioms and phrases themselves, ironically, is a task which the theorists and dictionary makers have been successfully and unsuccessfully attempting till date. As established earlier, the novel Tamas is culturally rich with many cultural associations. All the three varieties that are the idioms, phrases, and proverbs are found in this novel. So, they are found in abundance. How they translated Jeratan dealt with such long list of these expressions is a matter of deep scrutiny. Upon studying and making an inventory, it was found that these expressions are dealt in 12 different ways in the target language. So first one was that phrases were translated into phrases. 15 such cases were found, like for example, "Kaam shuru karo," translated as "to get going." "Bhanna utna" as "made angry." "Baat mein wazan," words carrying weight. Then another case was found that idioms were correctly translated into idioms. 17 such cases were found like this. "Halat kamzor parna" into "in a bad shape," like "nakku banne wali baat," to make an ass of oneself. "Do beriyon mein tang rakhna," to put his legs into boats. "Man halka karna" is lighten your beam. Then another case was found where idioms were translated into phrases. 18 such cases were found. "Haath pair phulna" as felt helpless. "Kaato to hoon nahi," translated as blood froze, etc. Then another case where phrases were translated into idioms. 8 such cases were found, like "ruswai karna," badnami karwana, to bring a bad name. "saaf baat par muh par
Shahida,
saaf baat muh par karna," to call.
Shahida, excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
Shahida, instead of like going through the entire list, I would request you to come to your observations regarding
Okay,
these
okay.
this translation that he has done. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just name the cases. Like idioms were simply explained. Like 33 cases were found where idioms were just explained in simple meaning. Then there were 7 cases where idioms were just explained literally. Okay, and then 4 phrases were there and they were just explained simply. Then idioms, they were not translated at all. 14 such idioms were there which were not translated at all. Then there were 2 cases like that when there was nothing in source text but idioms were added by the translator. Then there were 3 cases when the translation was ambiguous or simply wrong. Then 5 simple sentences were translated into idioms. Then lastly, 1 proverb is there and it was correctly translated. So in conclusion, I would say that recalling these strategies by Mona Baker and comparing them to the strategies incorporated by Jayaratin, it can be noted that the translator has quite efficiently transferred this aspect of culture into target language. Though in 7 cases he took a wrong turn and went on translating idioms literally and incorrectly in other 3 cases, yet this can be forgiven and ignored given his situation of standing in a mud pool of 120 expressions. He did not go overboard with his translation and also gives simple treatment to 4 phrases and 33 idioms. Though 33 is a large number for abandoning the cultural association and opting for paraphrase, yet it is always better to opt for a midway rather than going for the wrong translation or no translation at all. He also studied 7 idioms by himself in 2 places when there was no text in ST at all, and 5 places where ST was in simple language. Proverb, though only 1, was treated with fidelity and is translated well. Thus, Jayaratin can be labeled quite successful in handling the translating the idiomatic expressions and proverbial aspect of the culture in target language. What Mona Baker categorizes as the difficult area of translating these expressions, it seemed that Ratan successfully survived both the stages of difficulties and went further in establishing good balance in the translation. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shahida. And I think Shaista has now successfully unmuted herself. And
Yes,
we
ma'am.
invite Shaista to present her at the side. Yes, Shaista, please.
Yes, good morning, good evening, everyone. Topic of my presentation is Constructing Identity and Positioning Translation Work, a critical analysis of Anita Desai, translator, translated. First of all, I would like to give a brief outline of the story. It is a story of prematurely aged English teacher Prema Joshi, who teaches English to an indifferent student in Women's College, Delhi. Prema remains dissatisfied with her job. She always wants to connect with her dead mother's native language, Oriya. She used to read unsung heroine of Oriya, later Savarna Devi. Through a chance, she met Tara, her school batchmate's friend. A feminist publisher now offers Prema opportunity to translate marginalized writer into English. Prema translates Savarna Devi's work, but her works come under fire when she begins to modify slightly and she wants to improve the style for the book. Ma'am, my argument is here why creating position or style for a translation work call into question. Secondly, I would like to highlight Indians' complicated relationship with English language and ambivalent relationship Indians still have with the Indian writers in English. For this, I would like to focus on the central character Prema of this story. The area of this study explores how language, power relations, and cultural dislocation are responsible for constructing individual identity. What is the task of translator and how should we consider translated work? I don't like to discuss much on the idea of identity because it is very fundamental to Anita Desai's work. So I would like just to shift to the second key idea of my presentation, that is translation. The title of the novel, A Translator Translated, itself suggests the idea of encounter between two languages, cultural, and the fate of the translator and original writer. During the academic career, Prema as a student, her higher education, she made her higher education as a medium to contact with her dead mother's tongue, and she chose to study Oriya language at adult education after receiving a degree in English literature. Prema chooses Savarna Devi's work for her research work. She herself translates regional texts into English. As a result, her thesis on translation work counts as an alt subject. She spent many years as jobless. When Prema starts her career as a translator, her consciousness as a translator reveals in her act of selecting, recognizing, acknowledging the words. She encountered linguistic challenges, as many of the speakers before me has already mentioned what kind of the linguistic challenges faced by a translator. So when her translated, she recognized herself, her translation is some kind of a transcreation, and she asked herself, had I discovered a transcreation or even a collaboration? As a translator, Prema faced a very critical situation when a reporter asked Prema her cultural identity and her intention behind this translation. He asked, what made you to decide translate this work into a colonial language that was responsible for destroying the original language? Prema was blank. To whom it is important? To the reader, to the writer, here in Hindustani or in Hindustan or in the West. Again, this situation, Prema continued to translate her work, but her career as a translator reached its climax when the Savarna Devi's nephew, a native speaker of Oriya language, and the original reader of the text complains against the innumerable discrepancies between the source text and the translated work. At this time, Prema tried to create a style for her translated work, and it's called into question. So considering the translated work because the reader considered the translated work as a derivative and the second form of rape. Now the question is arise how we should take a translated work. So to answer this, the eminent literary writer Walter Benjamin, in her work, The Task of the Translator, proposed that translation does not exist for the purpose of bringing out the information of substance of original work or to make it more. Am I audible?
Shaista, kindly wind up your paper. You are audible, but kindly wind up your paper, okay? Just to come to the concluding remarks.
Yes, ma'am. So, to answer this question, what is the task of the translator? The eminent literary writer Walter Benjamin, in his work, The Task of the Translator, proposes the idea that the translation does not exist for the purpose of bringing out information or substance of the original or to make it more comprehensible. According to him, a translation exists independently and its recreation of the text ensure the survival of the original work. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaista, for a wonderful presentation. We move ahead to our next presenter, that is Professor Sini K from Kerala, and the topic is translation, the art of transformation, reading and writing.
Good evening, everyone. I hope I am audible.
You are.
Okay, thank you. So my paper is titled Translation, the Art of Transformation, Reading and Writing. I would like to begin with a quote, which is, all acts of communication are acts of translation. In an extended sense, we can say that we are all constantly engaged in some form of a translation process. Our speech, our perception, our ideas, our facial expressions, our movements, and our interpretations are all products of a complex translation dynamic. There is hardly any daily activity that does not involve some form of translation. So the inherent power of translation lies in its ability to build bridges between here and there. Translators cross the bridge from one language to the other, and they begin to think themselves into the situation on the other side of the bridge. It is a willingness to embrace the other accompanies the walk across the bridge. And the translators undergo a kind of transformation. They no longer insist that their way of looking at their own world is the only one. They adopt a sense of openness towards the situation at the end of the bridge. Translation becomes an encounter with the other, not a confrontation. Translators never come to rest. They are constantly in two places at the same time by building associations that carry the foreign into the known of their own language. And in that process, both the source language text and the receptor language text undergo a kind of transformation. Translation is neither the source language nor the receptor language, but the transformation that takes place in between. The trick of translation is that the act of it transforms everyone, which means it transforms the original text, it transforms the new language, it transforms the author and also the translator all. Translation is a kind of reading, of course, but it is also a kind of, translation is a kind of writing, but it is also a kind of reading, the slowest kind of reading in the world. Nothing is allowed to remain unarticulated or unexplained in the translator's mind. The translator is not allowed to skip anything. Translator must know the text better than the author. The author is allowed to write intuitively, sometimes blindly, but the translator is not. The translator must translate consciously and deliberately, which is the nature of translation. And it tells us something about the difference between writers and translators, between original works and translation. So as a conclusion, I want to tell you that the translated work is not the object itself. It is a reading, it is an act of seeing, and it is also the art of transformation. With that, I conclude. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Cindy. Yes, Huma ma'am, your comments?
Yes, there were very wonderful papers. Although I didn't comment on each and every of the papers because of the constraint of the time, but I observed that Manoj talked about the untranslatability of the phrases and the metaphors, because he was talking about translating from the Afghanistan, the literature from Afghanistan, and Shahira was talking about tamas. So she was discussing about that how when we are translating something which is Indian, which we already are acquainted about, so there is a shift from one culture to the other.
almost.
So there is this, of course, we have to understand the culture. So those cultural restraints are there. So these difficulties we are facing when we are translating from one different culture to another one. And if we are translating from our own culture, we are not facing these difficulties of translating the idioms and the phrases and everything. And Shaista's paper was also interesting, although she was talking about the fictional account of a translator. I think she was speaking about Anita Desai's work, and wherein there is this character who is having the role of a translator. And then, of course, Sini's work or rather paper was also very, very interesting, because she was talking about that how every act she's saying is about translation. Even gestures we make and the way we speak and whatever we are every act is how it comes under the category of translation. So these were wonderful papers, and each one was talking about.
We have one final paper. We have
Okay.
one final presentation left. So do we move ahead to that, Uma ma'am?
Yes, definitely. I know we are pressed for time.
We have one final presentation left, that is from Professor Razina, who's going to talk about interactive cyber art as a performative medium, redefining the space of the performative body from electronic to digital culture in the performance of Nam June Paik's TV Bra for Living sculpture. Yes, we have.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening,
Yes,
ma'am.
Razina.
Good evening,
Good
ma'am.
evening.
Respected Chair, Organizing Committee, and fellow participants. I would like to present, I'm Razina. I would like to present a paper on the topic, Interactive Cyber Art as a Performative Medium, Redefining the Space in the Performance of Nam June Paik. So the dawn of a bio-cybernetic age launched a wide range of new possibilities for humans to control virtual bodies and for machines to regulate the human body. It launched innovative developments in artistic media based on digital technology and prompted new departures in performing arts. In the past centuries, actors concerned themselves daily with the task of imagining themselves as a different person, and novelists conjured up travels to imagine lands. Performance artists responded to the developments and incorporated many of the achievements of the modern period, and some of these lines of experimentation changed under the conditions of an age of cybernetic system. As in the early part of the 20th century, avant-garde performance was a temporary site of exchange between the artist and the audience, and markedly different from mainstream theatre, which geared towards commodities that could be repeated. The postmodern avant-garde continued to deconstruct the unspoken conventions of theatre by dislocating and fracturing the theatrical frame, and which valorized process over product and encouraged the spectator to become a co-producer of the work, shifting the emphasis from looking to participating. The physical culture of the 1980s, with its narcissistic and fetishistic body beautiful ideology, caused some artists to specialize in paradoxic rotations of imagery that had become ubiquitous in commercial television and popular press. Now, whatever the theoretical position may be, the body as a cultural artifact or as an object of psychosocial narratives could best be demonstrated in the medium of performance. Now, Nam June Paik, he was a Korean-American musician and performer who engaged in a wide range of spectrum of experiments in various electronic media and explored some of the performative potentials of video sculptures, video projections, and video environments. He was quoted by many as a uno universale, that in quotes. It's a cross between postmodern Mozart and cybernetic Leonardo. Paik's early installation and videotapes operated with a strategy that ran counter to an ever-increasing...
Razina, can you be a little louder?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. Is it okay, ma'am, now?
Yes, now fine.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm very sorry. So, and the guiding aim behind this video work of the past 40 years has been to convert television from a passive pastime into an active creation. He countered the one-way communication structure of the mass media by highly creative interventions into the operative heart of the media. Now, Nam June Paik and his fellow performer, Charlotte Moorman, their performances was a sustained effort to examine the role of the human body in musical performances and sought to integrate sex and music and focus the audience's mind on erotics of musical performance. Their performance, a much highly acclaimed performance called TV Bra for Living Sculpture, undermines the high art traditions, not only in music but also in fine arts, and made fluxes and happening as well as experimental music accessible to audience who had only a very causal interest in these art forms. Their experiences with electronic music fostered interest in other electronic media, in particular video and television. The artistic collaboration between these two highly skilled classical musicians in a series of actions performed at various festivals and tours around the world was a sustained effort to examine the role of the human body in a musical performance. Now, another theme that ran through many of his video installations was the correlation between the different layers of reality and the issue of TV as a second nature. The ultimate aim behind such tactics and formal interventions was to question dominant production and reception practices in a media-saturated society. Paik was a social critic, a subversive visionary who questioned the role of a performer that functioned as a medium to instill a passive acceptance of dominant ideologies and societal structures by dispensing an opiate of mindless entertainment and low-pro information. In his performances, Paik outlined many concrete projects concerned with transformation television from a one-way delivery system into a medium of active exchange. His works contain a judicious balance of aesthetic enjoyment and social critique, but he usually leaves it to the audience to decide what conclusions should be drawn from these. As Leigh Landay and Anshe von Gravenstreis points out, this was not necessarily a sign of political naivety, but rather rooted in the Zen art or of method of teaching, which opened the eye to phenomena by asking questions about concrete examples, and not just by offering abstract percepts or instructions. So to conclude, I would say that the traditional concept of performance with its reliance on liveliness, immediacy, and presence had to be radically reconfigured with an age characterized by symbiotic coexistence of the organic and the cybernetic life. Thank you.
Thank you, Razina. And with this, we come to an end. We had scheduled 15 presentations for this session, but Dr. Upendra Kumar Dwivedi did not turn up, and we had 14 presentations. Therefore, we are extremely grateful to the listeners. Apart from the participants, we have had plenty of listeners who were here to encourage the various participants, and we are very glad for them. We are also very, very thankful to Professor Huma Yaqub, who paid us time, attention, and we would now invite her to sum up the entire session. Yes, Huma ma'am, over to you.
Yes, it was wonderful listening to all these very engaging paper presentations, and right from like the Indian literature to literature from Afghanistan to different aspects also. Like we had also the fictional aspect of translation, and we had the cyber art thing, the last paper that was talking about. So although it was a bit outside my scope, and I was not wholly able to decipher that particular paper, the last one, because it was altogether in a different arena. So, but otherwise, all the papers were very, very interesting, and particularly, I will talk about Dr. Sutapa's paper, Dr. Sutapa Chaudhary's paper, where she is also talking about, and I think other than her, there were other paper readers also who had talked about translation as a political act, and like she talks about that how that particular thing, that how when that particular text has been translated into English, that the gendered bias that comes in, that how the body odor is not being talked about. So that was something that even I was a little taken aback, that how could a writer not do justice to the text, and how the translator could evade all those things, and how there can be a gendered aspect to translation also. That was something very interesting. And of course, Shreyasi's paper, Dr. Shreyasi, she talked about the transcreation and the whole aspect of the character of Sita, how she has been transcreated and talked about in different literatures and through different mediums also. And then there was Dr. Madanala Prasad's paper. Yes, I wanted to talk about that because he had talked about this text Transposed Heads by Mann, the German writer, and he has talked about that how this has been translated into Girish Karnad's play, that is, he has written Hayavadana, and over there Girish Karnad is also talking about the transposed heads, how these two friends, how their heads are interchanged and all of that. But I disagree on the point that this we can't take as translation. So he is taking, or rather adapting and using this as a source, and there are other sources also. He has, like Girish Karnad has taken help from other folk tales and like all those classical tales, the Indian tales. Besides that, he has also, like how indirectly those things had come, like he had read Mann's Transposed Heads, and then he had written about this. So why he is talking about this particular text as translation, I am still to understand that fully in its full sense. So that was my observation, that this cannot be taken as translation. This is an adaptation, or not even adaptation, but rather inspiration sort of a thing, that he got inspired from that text and from other various sources, from classical legends and those tales, folklores and things like that. And that is how he took from these various sources, and then Karnad had written down his, it's not translation in any way. Although Karnad himself, he engages in transliteration, that is, he writes his own plays in Kannada language, I think, and then he translates them in English. Okay, that is what he has been doing, practicing. And like there are many other writers. There is this Urdu writer, Quratulain Haider, who also writes in Urdu and then transcreates that. So like how transcreation, as some of the paper reader was also talking about, that how transcreation becomes in itself is a creative process, because it is not exactly the translation, which is a more disciplined field, I would say, because of course it is, you have to somehow do justice to the original text, but then how transliteration, when you are doing, you can have that sort of an independence, and you can make changes, as these writers have done when they are transcreating from one language to another. Then there was this Dr. Afreen Khan's paper, that was also interesting. Here also she was also speaking about the whole role played by the politics, the language politics that is there. And there was this Ria Basu's paper, and therein she also talked about the sexual translation, that and that was an interesting paper. I remember that she was talking about, she was looking at the translation studies from the perspective or from the lens of the disability studies thing. Okay, so I had already commented on that, so I'll not go further into details of that paper. Then there was Krishnendu, I think Krishnendu K's paper, and he was she was talking about translation, and she was talking about the cultural resistance, and she was she had taken this particular text of K.R. Meera's Hang Woman. Okay, that was also a wonderful paper. And then there was Dr. Rupa Sarkar's paper, and she was talking about that how literature, when, or rather fiction, when it is, I think, how it is translated into another medium, into cinematic medium and things. And so that was also an interesting take. And then Manoj's paper. So I had already talked about that. He has discussed about the problem of untranslatability from one culture to another. That is, he is talking about literature from Afghanistan, Afghan literature, and how the translators, they have failed to transform or rather translate the phrases and the metaphors and the proverbs, because when the translator is not fully acquainted with the whole scenario, the cultural aspect of the original text, or the original text, then what happens is it becomes quite difficult for the translator to do justice to all these problem areas, because as it is, the phrases, the metaphors, and all of these figures of speech, they are very difficult to translate, because they themselves are problem areas. And when you are not very, very familiar with the cultural aspect, what happens is how it becomes all the more difficult. And Shahira Safdar Khan's, she had discussed Tamas, I remember, and over there she had analyzed how successfully the translator has been able to translate the idioms and the phrases, and she was giving the list of that and all of that. So, but over here the difference between Manoj's paper and Shahira's paper is that Manoj is talking about the untranslatability of these phrases and metaphors, and Shahira is talking about that how well this has been done, how it has been translated. I think the reason could be that Tamas is, of course, written in the Indian scenario, and how we know our own culture, so it is easier for a translator to translate that. And when we are taking up a text from a different region, from a different culture, so it becomes very difficult to do justice to that. Okay, and Anita Desai's this translated Shaista has read out that one. That was also a little different, thing, because over here she was not talking about or not using the translation theory from the literary perspective, but rather she is talking about the fictional account of the translator that has been given in this particular novel, and what the translator goes through, what are the difficulties that are faced by the translator. So it is from the fictional perspective that she has analyzed. Okay, and there was this Dr. Sini K's paper, and she has discussed about the art. Translation is the art of transformation, and of course this was also quite an interesting one, and like how she has been talking about that, how every act of ours, okay, whatever we do, the gestures we make, and how everything is like an act of translation that she's talking about. So of course that was also a very interesting one. And Dr. Razina's paper, of course this was something new for me, and this was she had discussed about the interactive cyber art as the performative medium, quite an interesting one. And I like congratulate Karim City College for hosting this particular seminar, international seminar, a wonderful one. And of course, I think from here on, this has given many of us a platform to express ourselves, to showcase our works and our papers. So it has been a wonderful experience interacting with you all. And I would particularly thank them for giving me this opportunity, and Dr. Yahya particularly, because he has been my classmate and a friend of mine. So that is like wonderful being a part of this venture. And I hope that further the 2 days we will have very engaging deliberations and some wonderful speakers and some wonderful plenary sessions as well that we will be listening to. So I just hope for the best, and I wish them all the best, that they will like particularly their colleges, I think, making great waves in the academic circles, and they are doing very well. And the papers were wonderful, and they were quite diverse also, and I personally enjoyed listening to all of you. And Basundhara, thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I like these all these teachers. They have become so familiar to me because I've been constantly. Yes, Basundhara.
Yes. To sum up the session and to deliver a formal vote of thanks, since you are here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Huma, for accepting our request in such a short notice. And there is nothing like that we are doing great waves. We are just making humble efforts, and it is just because of your love for us, your friendship for us, that makes you say like this. Thank you so much. And really beautiful papers. I was actually switching on between this session to that session conducted by Neha Tiwari ma'am also. But I got the opportunity of listening to a few papers here and a few papers there. So beautiful papers, and really very beautiful papers. I missed that cyber paper which you were mentioning. So I would have liked to listen to that paper. Thank you so much for this very interactive session, for your presence, Huma, and for all the paper presenters. We wish them good luck for their future. Thank you, Basundhara, for being the so patient host. Thank you so much.
Yes, even I personally like to thank Basundhara for being such a perfect host and anchor. She is like, I get this vibe that she's a very vibrant person, and I would personally love to meet her. And I never knew that you were present in the session, otherwise I wouldn't have said anything.
Thank you.
Okay,
No,
but
thank you.
definitely
And we are very grateful. We are very grateful to all those people who joined us as listeners, and they enthused the participants. So thank you very much all for being here. The certificates will be mailed to you after the 3-day seminar at the IDs from which are abstracts and the IDs which are registered with us. So you will be having the certificates shortly after the seminar is over, and we look forward to your continued support and participation in the next 2 days. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Thank
Thanks
you
to
so
all.
much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, ma'am. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
सर जो हमको मोबाइल दे दो